Welcome to On the Bauble Podcast, episode 25. I'm your host, Sabasa J. Ueda, and with me is my co-host, Yuki Lee Bender. Today we're going to be talking about not a mechanic, but a gameplay called Fatigue. Is it gameplay? What would be a strategy?
Yeah, strategy.
So then we're going to be talking about a strategy in Flesh and Blood that most people call Fatigue. And we'll go more in detail about that a bit later. But before that, how was your week, Yuki?
Honestly, my week felt pretty good. I think just the combination of finishing report cards, not being sick anymore, having more time because now I'm teaching 3 classes instead of 4. So I get prep time at work. It's just like everything's good right now. I have more time. I get to actually do things besides stay at home and mark and be sick. Week's been pretty good. Played some Magic on the weekend.
Do you want to go into that a little bit?
Sure. So I was feeling bored. I noticed that there's an RCQ, which is, I guess, is basically like a pro quest, sort of.
Yeah, it's basically a pro quest.
Essentially a pro quest for Magic the Gathering with their latest set, Phyrexia something.
I think it's Phyrexia all becomes one? All is
something
one?
like that. All is one? Yeah, something like that. Something to do with everything becoming one. Anyways, there's a limited, essentially, pro quest, and I was feeling kind of bored, so I messaged Jay, and we decided to go. I don't think either of us had really played the set much at all.
No, I didn't even. I decided not to go to the pre-release for the set either. So Yuki invited me on Friday, and I was pretty busy on Saturday. I got to play like I got 2 games of sealed in on Arena, like not 2 like sealed pools, like 2 physical games.
Well prepared.
Well prepared.
I played. I think I played 2 sealed pools on Arena, so a little bit more, but I was definitely still like reading a lot of cards at the event and being like, "What does that do? I don't know any of your cards." And just like mixing up my zones, like just like forgetting that, like I don't know, just like the Magic layout, and it was not great. Anyways,
So how'd you do in the event?
I did great. My pool was obscene. I opened. You get a rare per pack, and the rares in Magic are very, very good sometimes. I got to. You don't always get to play all of your rares because they might go in different decks, but I got to play 5 out of 6 of my rares, and 4 of them are like pretty game winning if you resolve them, or like make it very hard for your opponent to win. So a lot of my games, I just sat there playing broken rares and making people answer it. I had like, well, I won't go too much into detail, but I had some very, very strong rares, some of the best ones in the set for sure. It was great. I had fun. I went 4-0-2, won my first game in top 8, and then we all decided to split and go home. It was already like 6 p.m. on a Sunday, and I think everyone was just kind of tired.
Yeah, so you end up getting the top format, the promo, a quarter of basically most of the credit that they were giving out.
Yeah, it was a great weekend. And like when I say 4-0-2 in Magic, draws are you can intentionally draw because a match win is worth 3 points and a draw is worth 1 point. So once I had already gone 4-0 in the first 4 rounds, if I draw, it's like having like 2/3 of a win. And essentially, like, because of the number of people, once I draw, it's like nobody can really catch up to me. So at 4-0-2, I was still the first place seed since a lot of people decided to draw in. It's quite common in Magic.
Yeah. Like for myself, I also 4-0'd and then drew with Yuki on the 5th round.
Yeah, we decided to go to some game store nearby, and then we came back for the next round, drew with our opponents, and played Pokemon.
Yeah, there's gonna be a Pokemon regionals in Vancouver in not even a month. I think it's 3 weeks from now. There's gonna be a Pokemon regional, so I ended up buying for those that know, the Mew, I don't know what they're called, but they're like precons that have like meta decks in it. So I bought 2 of those. I'm gonna smash it together and bring that to regionals. So before I take it apart, I was like, Let's teach Yuki how to play Pokemon, and we can play Pokemon together.
Yeah, honestly, it's pretty fun. I've actually technically played Pokemon before, but it was like when the first set was out and I was in grade school. So I think it's been over 20 years since I've played, not even exaggerating. So I was a little bit like, the details were a little bit fuzzy to say the least.
Yeah, well, the game was pretty close. I thought I was gonna lose, and then I pulled it out. But
Jay thought he was going to lose, and he goes, "Oh, yeah, there's this mechanic I forgot to tell you about. You lose." And I'm like, okay, cool. No, I'm just kidding. I think I would have lost anyways.
yeah, you drew all of the bad cards. The all the cards that are gonna get cut from the deck. You drew. So
Yeah. And you can like there's like a card where you get to like draw up to a certain number of cards every turn, but they were just cards that I couldn't play and I didn't have a way to get them out of my hand. So Jay's just sitting there drawing like 3 to 4 cards a turn and I'm like, huh, I can't play these and I can't get them out of my hand.
okay, let's move on to our main. Actually, before we move on to our main topic, let's talk about something that just got spoiled this afternoon, which is the mechanic stealth. Do you know what this mechanic does, Yuki?
Pretty close to nothing. Um, it is a keyword that doesn't do anything on its own. It has no game rules text. And it seems that its primary purpose is there will be like other cards hung off of stealth. So we've seen some of those, like we've seen some on some attack reactions that can only be played on cards that have stealth. So I guess stealth kind of allows for certain card effects or reactions to be played on them, but we don't know. And we've seen some of them, but we don't know the whole pool of cards and everything that's possible.
Yeah, so I'm assuming that Uzuri is gonna have a hero power that says do X to a stealth card, or do something when a stealth card is played, or something in that air, something like that.
Yeah, and
Uh,
there's probably going to be like 1 or 2 scary attack reactions. Do something bad so that like you can. I don't know. It seems like the attack has to be scary, or else like what's the point, right?
yeah, at least the common cards with stealth is like pretty off rate. We talked about them last week, but a 0 for 3 with an on hit is not where you want to be on a card.
Yeah, very interested to see kind of like what the rest of the mechanics surrounding stealth are. Um, Overall, what do you think? Are you a fan of stealth so far?
I think it's slightly better designed than aim counters, but I don't know. I don't like either of them.
Ooh, okay. Why do you dislike aim counter?
I don't like aim counters because it's exactly like stealth, where it's just like a keyword essentially on a card. But like aim counters, you have to like how do I say it? It's like a physical counter on a card that you have to track for something that does absolutely nothing to the game most of the time.
Yeah,
So like if you are playing, let's say, Azalea with the Sand Scour Great Bow, and you have each time you get an arrow with Azalea's ability, you have to put the aim counter on it. But you could have like 0 cards in your hand or just in your deck actually that doesn't have anything to do with aim counters. But then if you don't put an aim counter on it, you technically get a what is it? A game rule violation? A miss beneficial trigger?
it's probably a misbeneficial trigger.
Which if it keeps on happening, you technically could get like an upgraded penalty, I'm pretty sure.
Probably.
But like
It
it's
definitely is a little bit awkward. Um, we'll see. Maybe they make it a little more compelling and interesting down the road. But I agree. Right now, it's sort of like just this extra thing to track, and it's like kind of it's okay. It's kind of half baked.
yeah, like I would just wish like instead of like aim counters, they could have been like if you have Sand Scour Great Bow, then all of your cards get or all of the aim counter cards work or something like that, where it was like more dependent on the type of bow they were using or something that's like not a counter that goes on a card that gives no actual abilities.
Yeah, I hear you. It'd be nice if it did something. I'm kind of in the same boat. I'm not a huge fan of these keywords that don't do anything on their own. I kind of wish that they did. Um, and like, yeah, they could give us a piece of equipment that gives like your cards with aim counters +1 and like design them around that. But it's also just like, why not just make the counter give it +1? And I don't know. Like, not like they haven't actually done that, but I'm just, yeah,
Yeah, as an example.
it's a bit awkward. It's okay. It's not the worst. It's not the worst mechanic, honestly. It just feels like why.
Yeah, it just feels like, man, this card is bolded. It should be important, but it's actually not important. And you're gonna have like random people ask you, "What does stealth do?"
I think aim counters are great because people don't block your. You play on Talishar and people don't block your drill shot, and then you put a -1 counter on their equipment, and they go, "Why did I get a -1 counter? There's no aim counter." And I go, "It doesn't matter."
Wait, does drill shot do something with an aim counter on it?
Yeah, it gets piercing 1.
I didn't. I actually didn't know drill shot had something to do with aim counters on it.
Yep, it does, and I think a lot of people assume that it's like the minus, like I can see like it's like the main effect. So you're like, oh, surely that's the aim counter, but like the more marginal piercing 1 is the aim counter, and then the arrow is just good on its own. That's probably like why it's the main aim counter card that sees play, is because it's just good on its own. So it is the same as Deadeye. Like Azalealist has just picked it up as like a yellow 3 block that can pump for 3. Um, so like the cards that are just like good on their own and then happen to have aim counters have been a lot better than the like hemorrhage bores as just like a vanilla arrow unless you have an aim counter on it.
Okay, let's move on to our main topic, which is fatigue. Do you want to explain what is fatigue?
So fatigue is basically a strategy where your win condition is running your opponent out of cards in deck. You don't literally win the game when that happens, but of course, once they have no more cards to play, it becomes very hard to block and very hard to attack for meaningful damage. So often, this is a win condition. We often see this in decks that have like strong weapons. Like there used to be like ninja fatigues that just relied on Kodachi value over and over again. Bravo used to do this with Anathos. More recently, we've had Oldham with Winter's Wail, and often just that recursive value of the weapon kind of lets you just close out the game in the long run, and eventually your opponent just can't block it anymore, and they run out of cards.
So right now, at least in our notes, I see you put in two different bullet points. This is passive fatigue and active fatigue. What do you mean by passive fatigue?
So I think there's kind of two flavors that fatigue can take. The first one is, I think, what a lot of people think of when they think of fatigue, and this is like maybe some of the Oldham lists that came out very early on when like Oldham was a brand new hero that relied very heavily on Rampart of the Ram's Head and Crown of Seeds to just sit there and block out damage. Like you saw them like just sitting there blocking Shane and essentially like weathering the storm until Shane decks himself, and doing this strategy against Briar as well. Yeah, and then once again, we've seen a bit of a resurgence of what I call this like more passive fatigue that's very defensive focused. Um, with Oldham, once again, now that Winter's Wails has been banned, some Oldham players, not all, have switched to that sort of like life gain Warhorn Remembrance build that can sort of remove win conditions from setup decks and then also just outlast the more aggressive decks like Briar. Well, maybe not specifically Briar. That's a terrible example because Briar can loop cards. But anyways, outlast Fi.
Then what is active fatigue?
Active fatigue is more. I'm just kind of defining this as like when you're actively playing cards, and by playing your cards, you're sort of potentially decking your opponent. I think a great example of this is Dromai, where you kind of have to, if you don't manage the dragons, you get overrun. But because the deck blocks really well, it might play some Sigils of Solace to give its dragons go again and incidentally gain life, and you're spending all this extra damage on all her dragons that are not going and attacking her specifically. So in this way, she's kind of like demanding a lot of cards from you. And so even though she's playing a more proactive strategy, she can part of her angle is that she can risk fatiguing you. Um, Arachne is potentially like this, although I think Arachne can also be pretty heavy, like defensive. So it maybe depends how you're building it. And I think even some of the like proactive Oldhim lists were like this sometimes. Like sometimes you saw games where Oldhim would just smash you with spinal crushes over and over again and endless winters, and you're just sitting there blocking because if you don't, you don't get a turn, and you just end up decking out because you're blocking all their big attacks and you run out of threats. So it wasn't like the primary strategy of that deck, but it was like definitely part of what it could do and what it could threaten.
Yeah, I think those are really good examples. You guess we'll go to the next topic. Do we like? Sorry, do you like fatigue, Yuki?
I think in general, I'm pretty okay with the active fatigue decks. I think it adds an interesting angle where you kind of have to manage the threats in your deck, and I think that they're doing things that are pretty healthy for the game. Like they're usually finding ways to slow down the game, either with permanence in the case of Dromai that you have to interact with, or with or with disruption in the case of Ultim. So I think that active fatigue is actually pretty healthy. The passive fatigue I'm not such a fan of because I feel like it just kind of reduces a lot of your cards to their block value or like maybe their pitch value if you're dealing with arcane, and everything just becomes like a blocking card in your weapon, and you have like maybe some defense reactions and not a lot of your other cards really matter. Or like maybe you have like Warhorn, like you have like a couple key cards in the deck and then the rest of your deck is just like titanium baubles.
Oh my god! Now I just want to see a fatigue deck just play titanium baubles just to make a point.
You probably could. Like, if you only ran titanium baubles, your deck would probably be bad. But like,
No, but like you can only play 3 copies of titanium bauble.
yeah, you could run three, and I don't think it would hurt you all that much. Honestly, might hurt you like your Dromai matchup if you're Oldhim, because then you don't have as many poppers. But
What? Where do we get titanium baubles?
I think it's Reinar versus Doranthea classic battles or whatever.
Oh, you didn't get a full playset, did you? I think you got one per deck.
I have no idea.
It's tempting me to play titanium baubles now,
Just to make a point.
just to make a point.
What do you think about passive and active fatigue?
Myself, I actually just enjoy playing fatigue decks in general, both passive and active. On Talishar, I like only play Arachne because I just like doing that type of blocking out basically everything my opponent's doing, and then pitching a blue for Spider's Bite for 1. It's just like it's definitely like a play style that I really enjoy, is just like grinding through my opponent's whole deck and then picking at them until they like can't win anymore, essentially.
Yeah, your win condition is just not losing for long enough that they can no longer win the game.
No, I think a better way of saying it would be like your win condition is running your opponent out of win conditions.
That's reasonable. And I can definitely see some of the appeal to it. Like, I think, like, I played Hearthstone. In Hearthstone, there were also fatigue decks, and I actually really enjoyed those because it kind of felt like you were playing your whole deck against their whole deck, and there was a lot of like, can I use this threat here? Like, I have an answer to this thing, but can I use it here to deal with this, or do I need to save it for like one of their other cards that I know? So like, I really enjoyed that aspect. I think I liked that I was like playing my cards, whereas I feel like fatigue in this,
You're
I just feel like your
blocking.
cards don't matter. Like they're just 3 blocks.
No. The whole point of fatigue decks in this game is how do you make your 3 blocks actually block for 3, and how do you get your like the special 4 blocks to actually block for 4? Because when your 4 blocks start blocking for 3 and your 3 blocks starting blocking for 2, you're gonna have a problem.
Is that fun though? I feel like it's just like this thing attacks for 3 or more. I use my 3 block. This thing attacks for 4 or more. I use my 4 block. I know that's like a little bit reductive because you're predicting what your opponent's doing, but I've just never found like I've played Prism Fatigue into Chain, and that's even like a more active fatigue deck because sometimes you kill them with Blood Debt and like your Arclight Sentinels. So there was like stuff to think about there, and I still thought that was pretty boring.
No. The what you have to do, actually, not what you have to do, but the way that I take enjoyment from playing Fatigue is at a specific point, both players are gonna hit their pitch stack, and then the feeling that I love when I play Fatigue is when both player have like 22 cards left in their deck. If you know you've won or lost, or like if you're like losing, if you can like somehow turn that pitch stacked deck into a winning spot somehow, right? So like there's a lot of like not you're not really you don't really have to think about what's happening on the current turn because like you're blocking and they're gonna attack you with whatever cards they have. But it's more of like how do I adjust my pitch stack or like how fast I go through my deck to be able to line up the right cards with their right cards. So I guess a good example would be like typically something like Razor Reflex and Pummels that gets pitched is like can you line up the defense reactions or the right defense reactions with the like with their pummels. So like sometimes like you would like pitch a Sigil of Solace into the bottom of your deck, or a life gain card that would only block for 2 or doesn't even have a block value. And if you line that up with their pummel, you're gonna lose. Like you're just never gonna win that game. But then can you like somehow adjust the pitch stack by like maybe keeping a card in your hand and only drawing 3 cards so you can move your pitch stack by 1, or like small things like that where lining up your defensive cards with your opponent's win conditions is something that I enjoy doing all the time.
That's fair. I can see how the second cycle could be pretty rewarding when you put it that way. It's not something I had really considered, but
Yeah,
makes sense.
it's not the second cycle, Yuki. It's the fourth cycle that you want to win on.
Yeah, I know a lot of you fatigue players are built different. I know at nationals I saw Tarek Patel trying to figure out the Fi matchup by just like playing with face down cards and imagining like Fi's attacks and being like, I block, and then like this turn I arsenal, and then they're on a 5 card hand, and I like, line up my crown with their 5 card hand, and I'm leaking this much damage, but I'm hammering for this much, and then they're gonna run out of reds, and like there's clearly a lot to this. It was just interesting to watch because it's like not a way that typically engage with the game.
During nationals, like the fatigue Oldham lists were so good, so easy. You had Pulse of Eyes and Love. That card's insane,
It's true.
that
Imagine if they still had it.
dude. That card just blocks for 6 by pitching it to Oldham's ability. How's that fair?
That's why it's banned. All
That's
right. I think a lot of people that have listened to us for a while probably already expected our answers. I think we've kind of talked about them before. Do you want to talk about, regardless of whether or not we like fatigue, whether it's healthy for the game? Are you ready to move on?
yeah. I'm ready to move on.
Okay. So we want to talk about, is fatigue healthy for the game? And in our notes, it kind of says healthy in quotation marks. And I think healthy kind of means different things for different stakeholders in the game. And so we're going to kind of break it down by the different stakeholders and kind of how it impacts each of them, and talk about that. So to give you an overview, we're going to talk about fatigue in casual play, which we're kind of defining as like, I guess, like armory or under. Competitive play, which would, I guess, be everything above that. Tournament organizers, so the people running the tournaments, I guess potentially judges in here as well. And finally, spectators.
I guess I'll just start off with the casual play. I think fatigue is awful for casual play. Like, doesn't matter how much I say I like fatigue or like I love playing fatigue, I love the fatigue mirror. When I'm needing to do this or playing against somebody that doesn't typically play competitive Flesh and Blood, fatigue is like, how do I say this? Fatigue is not a gameplay that I would want to show a brand new player.
Why is that, Jay?
It because you're gonna make like these new players feel like no matter what they do, they can't actually win. And like
Yeah.
the best way to play any card game or any board game is to experience winning.
Yeah, I think I agree. I think like sitting back and feeling like you're getting stonewalled. Like you pick up this game and you're like, I was trying to play my cards and my opponent just sat there and blocked and then I lost. Cool game. Like I could see that being actively detrimental, especially for newer players. What do you think about like players who have been around for a bit but are still casual? Because I feel like a lot of people, like I'm thinking of certain players that are locals that play at armories, I think generally are not huge fans of fatigue. I've just heard them like talking about it. What do you think? So we kind of talked about like the new player experience. What do you think might be not so fun for some players that are maybe not new, but just, maybe they'll play like a local pro quest or two, but they're not like traveling and grinding events.
Well, the worst part about those, like the fatigue decks, will be if you aren't a player that plays fast enough, you actually experience a lot of draws when you play against fatigue decks. So sometimes it feels like when you're playing against a fatigue deck, but you yourself is a little bit slow, you end up drawing a lot. And when that happens, you feel like if you've played out your whole deck, the fatigue player would have died, and like you would have won the game. And the reason why you couldn't finish the game was because they're playing the strategy that you can't, like you couldn't bring the game to a conclusion. And a lot of the time, it's like a little bit of a misconception where typically, if the fatigue deck gets to that point, you're almost never going to beat the fatigue deck, but it still feels bad when you draw and basically both player loses. And as I said, like with the casual players, that like the newer player, not winning is not fun.
And I think just like, yeah, the feeling of drawing can be frustrating. And I think also just fatigue in this game naturally puts a lot of pressure on your opponent to have like a specific answer to it in like perhaps their deck construction or maybe in their gameplay, like they have an end game pitch deck or they have a, I don't know, an evergreen loop, or you're planning to, I don't know, play a bunch of insidious chills and discard your opponent and then have like a big combo turn. Like you usually have like a very specific way to overcome that. And I think that sometimes forcing players to kind of play that like lethal puzzle, if you will, can be, if they're not in the like, not everybody enjoys playing against that or figuring that out, and you're kind of like forcing them to do it whether they want to or not, which I think especially at a casual setting can be kind of off-putting for some people.
Yeah, and the other thing is like, as you said, like these strategies, you have to start doing it from turn one. You can't like figure this out halfway through the game.
Yeah, I think from both sides, right? Like you need to be committed to fatigue as the fatigue player, and you also need to be thinking about at least like the possibility. Like when you sit down against an Oldham, you need to at least be thinking about the possibility of fatigue, and then kind of do a evaluation 1 to 3 turns about, is fatigue on the table? Have they taken enough damage? Think about it. Should I be set defensively?
Let's move on to competitive play. Do you think it's healthy for a competitive setting?
I think it's okay. I guess I feel like from a competitive player standpoint, you should be doing what you think gives you the best chance to win. And fatigue is a legitimate strategy that can let you win. And I never would like it if, even if I don't personally love fatigue and I have some issues with it, I never would hold it against a competitive player for playing the strategy because they're just playing within the rules of the game, and that's totally reasonable. So in a lot of senses, I don't have an issue with it in competitive play. I just also don't know that. I mean, I guess some people are really enjoying it. So I guess the upside is that some players like yourself and I'm sure many others really that style of gameplay, and that's pretty cool. But I think the potential downside is just it can kind of drag out the event. There is that risk of draws, and I guess I wish it felt more even. I feel like fatigue puts a very big onus on the person playing against fatigue, like trying to overcome it, to find a way to beat it. And I feel like for some competitive players, actually for a lot of competitors, this can be like a pretty big knowledge check. And you can kind of like, it feels like there's like a little bit of like a gotcha element to it in some cases. Like I guess it kind of depends. Like if you're fatiguing like chain or even like lightning briar back in the day, I was more interested in that. I thought that was kind of cool. But I also feel like if your strategy just into every matchup is like, I'm just going to fatigue every matchup with my fatigue Oldham deck, it's sort of, you're putting a lot of pressure on your opponent to play quickly into your like very long strategy that doesn't take much input from you and takes a ton of takes a ton of input from them. And I find that aspect of it just like a little bit obnoxious, and just like you can play it into Briar, and I think if you play it into a Briar that's really practiced and has the plan, you're probably never beating them. But at the same time, you'll beat a lot of Briars because they just like can't execute, or maybe you'll draw against them because they don't play fast enough, or maybe maybe they're just like not quite where they need to be, and they're not quite at. I think often these strategies are quite hard to beat, and you need to be like quite a strong player to be seasoned into it. And I guess that aspect of it is more than anything like almost like obnoxious or just unpleasant. Like I just feel like it just creates these kind of feel bad moments.
Yeah, well, it's more. I think a good example would be like it feels like the fatigue player puts like a brick wall in front of you, and they're asking you, "Did you bring the tools to break it down? Do you even have a plan to break it down?"
Yeah.
And sometimes, if you don't bring a plan to break it down, you just have to sit there and like you either have to play fast enough so your opponent wins, or you play slow and both players lose. Like you get to a point where you can't ever win when you just like, when you sit down, you can't win. It's not a good feeling.
On the whole, it is probably not as bad for competitive players as it is for casual or new players. But I do think that you're sort of servicing like it's definitely the kind of deck that like some people are really getting enjoyment out of, and it's like perhaps a lens of others. And that's not necessarily like a terrible thing. Like I think there will always be those kinds of decks in card games. I know that even though Icelander is not a fatigue deck, there are a lot of people that hate playing against Icelander, and I love Icelander. So like I can't even say that I haven't put people in like the same spot. It's not the exact same spot, but I think that I think it's important in these discussions to keep in mind that like even if I don't like fatigue, or like you're not a fan of it, like someone else's a listener is not a fan of fatigue, just because you don't have fun playing against it isn't necessarily a reason it shouldn't. There's probably like some kind of tipping point. Like if absolutely everybody's not having fun and like hates it, then it's not good. But I don't know exactly where disliking it.
Yeah, there's definitely always gonna be someone that's gonna love it. I'm gonna go back a little bit to the Magic the Gathering example, but I loved playing Lantern Control, which is like this is like the farthest spectrum you can get to like a fatigue deck, where you are literally playing cards that have no impact in the game whatsoever, other than looking at the top card of your opponent's deck, and you play 4 copies of this card.
Can't it put a card to the bottom or something if you sacrifice
No,
it?
if you sacrifice it, you shuffle your opponent's deck.
Oh, you shuffle. Okay,
Yeah,
okay. Yeah, so if they have a card that you really don't want to see, you can shuffle. And for anybody not familiar with Magic, this mechanic is a lot stronger in Magic because you only draw 1 card per turn. So often, if you know like the whole contents of their hand and you see what they're drawing, like you can predict their entire turn.
yeah. There's like just I just love that strategy. I just like fatigue or like just like control esque, not really control, but like more of the I'm gonna I'm just not gonna let you play the game type of deck. So it's just like is something I like.
See, it's so interesting because I enjoy like stacks and prism and denial strategies, but I don't like fatigue, and I couldn't even necessarily tell you exactly what the difference is. But I like strategies. Like I think that's why I like Icelander is I like just like discarding, disrupting. I find all of that super fun. But something about fatigue just like never appealed to me. It might just be like it might be what I talked about. It just like feels like my cards don't matter, and I don't like that.
The thing, you know what's funny though? I hated playing against Prism, playing as Chain in the Chain meta, because like your 1 card Arclight Sentinel would just when you play that card, I lose. Like in a spot where it matters, and you play Arclight Sentinel, I take like 6-7 damage, and my turn ends, and then you get to attack me. Like, how is this fair?
Look, I love Prism. Prism's a good deck.
Or like Icelander when like they chain like 8 channel Lake Fridges in like one game, like they have it for the whole game. It's not a pleasant feeling, Yuki.
It's so fun. I
So
gotta sit there and make it so that you don't get to play the game. Yeah, both Jay and I are just sick like that. I guess in different ways. Apparently, we like different flavors of the same kind of thing. No, but like I think that Icelander has this like really cool like tempo, proactive element to it as well. Like
Yeah, it feels like you're using card abilities to disrupt your opponent, which is different from using block value to disrupt your opponent.
I just want to play my cards. I just want to play my cards and I want to draw cards. It's like all I want to do in card games. If I can do a deck that does a lot of both of those things, then like it's even better.
Okay, let's just we're getting a little bit sidetracked. Let's go back into this.
Yeah, so I guess the last group that we haven't touched on that we can touch on really briefly is tournament organizers and spectators. And I think that these are like pretty clearly negatives. For tournament organizers, fatigue can really stretch out the game, especially in top eight. It just takes. And then for spectators, I think I'm sure that there are people that enjoy watching the grindy Oldham mirrors, but I feel like in general, it's like not. It doesn't feel like the matchups that I see excited about. And I know personally, whenever I see fatigue, it like sometimes I'll watch it at two times, and the rest of the time I'll seek like 1 minute at a time and just see what happens.
You know what's really funny is when I was watching, what was it, the calling coverage? My favorite game to watch was the Fatigue Oldham versus the Briar game. And the Briar, sorry, I forgot who the Briar player
Nathan, I
was.
think it was Nathan Crawford. Like the was this the game where the Briar ended up winning with the rights of replenishment loop?
Yeah, yeah, it was that one.
I thought that game was pretty cool. I have to agree that actually was a pretty good game, and I did watch all of that one.
Yeah.
I
The
think that the players played fast made it a lot more pleasant to watch. Like it was untimed, and like the players actually played like pretty quickly. Sometimes it's just so slow. Like players just sit there and tank for so long. It's so boring.
I think it's like it's not even like a fatigue thing that's like gonna make it bad for the spectators. I think it might just be like the pace of play. So like when a player just plays slowly, it doesn't matter if it's an aggro mirror or the fatigue mirror. If players are playing slowly, it's not pleasant to watch.
That's fair, and I guess it's made worse if it's like an untimed 2 hour top eight match that just drags on forever. Whereas like if it's an aggro mirror, even if they're taking a long time, it's like the game is still
40
short enough
minutes,
to
30
be
minutes.
digestible. Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
One thing I just wanted to talk about the fatigue Oldham versus the Briar game was like I felt like the fatigue Oldham could have won that game if he didn't leak like some number of damage here and there and got to keep slightly more cards to put more pressure on the Briar's life total. Whereas if you kept where there was a point where he was looping the rights loop, but then if you had the specific cards to gain the life and to block with the Crown of Seeds and the Rampart, you could have Titan's Fist enough times to put Briar back to like 7 health and then start pressuring the hand again. Then I think Oldham could have won through the loop.
yeah. There was definitely a lot to that match, and it's not necessarily as straightforward as like they have a loop in their deck so they can never win. It's like definitely closer and more involved in that, and it depends on like the Briar's early ability to push some damage and then establish the loop and like close out the game with that loop.
Yeah, I was just sad that the Warhorn was on play, and I think there was a turn where he could have used the Warhorn and he didn't, and I was like, no, that's 7 life.
Oh yeah, I don't remember the game well enough anymore. It's been a bit.
Then let's talk about should LSS do anything about the fatigue stuff?
Honestly, I think that it's a strategy that they should definitely be careful about when designing cards because hmm, I think that if fatigue, I guess right now fatigue feels kind of okay because it is a flavor of Oldham. But I feel like if fatigue ever became like the tier zero deck that just like everybody was playing, I think it would be pretty. It wouldn't be great. Like it doesn't really feel like a great place for the game to be. Like just like I don't think if like Kano was tier zero, that would be like a particularly healthy place for the game to be. Um, Often these like super polarized decks that are like playing the game in an unusual way is maybe like not the main mode that the game should be engaged in. So I think they need to be really careful when designing cards for fatigue. And in particular, I think they should think about effects like Warhorn that can potentially deal with these setup decks permanents, and maybe consider like maybe as a safety valve on that card if LSS is indeed concerned about people looping Warhorn, which maybe they're not, maybe they like that gameplay pattern, but if they were concerned about it, I'd like to see them maybe consider having some of these like legendary cards banish themselves when you activate them, just so you don't have to worry about them getting recurred, because it's like, yeah, you can get rid of remembrance, but then anytime anything else recurs it is. So I think that they just need to be like very, very careful how many tools they give the strategy. And I think it's important for there to be, I think it's important that there are counters to it as well.
Yeah, I think Warhorn itself is a pretty well designed card already. It's they made it legendary, so you can't play more than one copy in your deck. Already they've looked into making sure that fatigue doesn't just like run over the format. And we can see this by like cards having slightly more aggressive values on them than defensive values. So and a lot of the cards that are defensive in general are class specific. So like we don't get so many. I'm assuming we're not gonna get another 0 for 4 defense reaction at generic anytime soon.
Yeah, we saw them print Sink Below and Fate Foreseen, and it seemed like they pretty quickly realized that if they print a good 4 for 0 defense reaction every set, then it might have negative impacts on the game down the road. So I think it's something, actually, I know it's something that LSS is aware of. Brian Gottlieb on Twitter, who works for LSS, I think has like a, I don't know if I don't know if he's part of the design team or I think he's a contractor, but he helps design cards and sets. Anyways, and he's also a caster. He has talked about this and has mentioned that it's like a very fine balancing act and something that they're constantly checking in with. So overall, I think LSS has done a pretty good job managing fatigue. And I think an interesting thing to consider is that like it's easy to get really critical of fatigue, but keep in mind you also do need defensive strategies to be viable, or everything just becomes aggro decks running at each other. So like the other opposite end is not good either, right?
Yeah, when only fatigue, no, sorry, only like Fi and Briar becomes viable decks, it's gonna be awful to play. I regret all of my decisions playing Fi in the last PQ season. It wasn't fun, at least for me.
Yeah, and I think there's like a place for those decks, but I think at least a lot of the five players I talk to often enjoy like some of the more mid-rangey matchups more than they enjoy the Fi mirror specifically. And like thinking about like just a little bit back, if you think back to the Stubby Hammers Phi deck, like those mirrors were even more awful. So I just think like the more that you go into this like hyper aggressive blocking doesn't matter, the more that that's also a problematic design space. So I think it is like a very, very tight balancing act that LSS has to do. And so far, so good.
The last thing is, do you think LSS needs to ban anything?
I think it's too early to say. I would lean to, I feel like I always say this. I would lean towards no action right now. I think it's reasonable to give people time to adapt. Although, at the same time, if they want to get, I feel like if they want to hit some aspect of the fatigue ultim deck, I'm opposed to it either. Like something about, I hear what you're saying about Warhorn being legendary, then having to recur it with, but just like the whole, I find like the whole plan and like the like Crown of Seeds just being like this engine that enables it. It just kind of feels like it's like mind space. And if they decided to hit, I think the main pieces are, I don't think they should ban Warhorn, but I guess the main Remembrance or Crown of Seeds. Um, I think that's something they could look at. I know they don't want to ban L's, so I don't know if they will. If they hit some aspect of this, I wouldn't be upset, but I also don't think, I'm not advocating for bans either, I guess is my position. What do you think?
I'm gonna be very biased here. I want to play Fatigue Oldham. I'm just missing Imperial Warhorn. That card is randomly hard to find in Canada. I'm not really actively looking for it either, so that might be the case as well. But yeah, I don't think anything should be banned. Remembrance would probably be the card to get banned, if anything. I don't think they need to ban Warhorn. That card is not that good, anyways. And yeah, they're just not gonna ban L's. No way. That would hurt my wallet too.
Yeah, I think they'd really like to avoid it, and not to say they never have. They did ban Crown of Seeds in Blitz, but it's always still been legal in at least one format. And then they've also banned Stormstriders briefly before unbanning it due to, I don't know if it's due to backlash or because Kino kind of disappeared, or I don't know the like exact reason for it, but I people were definitely not. I think people were not super thrilled about Stormstriders, like such a marquee card for a class getting banned. So yeah, I don't know. Maybe the right play is just to keep banning cards around Crown of Seeds and leave Oldhim and Earth Heroes with Crown of Seeds is just like a very powerful and very I think a very interesting equipment. It kind of does something nothing else in the game does right now.
Yeah, yeah. What was I gonna say? I was gonna say something. Oh, I remember now. Yeah, like cards like Crown of Seeds and just like cards like Ram's Head, Heart of Fendel, cards like these where they have slightly more defensive value than or like recurring defensive value is like the reason why fatigue decks can exist. And at least for now, Arachne doesn't have any like consistently repeating um defensive value other than Heart of Fendel. So that's not gonna be an issue yet. But in Outsiders, if Arachne gets any kind of recurring defensive value card, so like maybe something like a Mask of Perdition that or at least a way to make silvers easier to make Mask of Perdition a problem, you're gonna see some kind of super passive fatigue Arachne deck coming up as well. And I just wanted to like say that a formula for a bad format or like too many fatigue is just gonna be cards that generate life or defensive value for free without using any cards.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. The and we kind of saw that previously with Drone of Brutality as well, right? Where these cards that keep providing value and don't take cards from your deck are very very powerful in the right spots. And I think that that's like a common trend and one that we're going to probably continue to see. Honestly, I don't really see that going anywhere. Just anytime that you're making the game all about every single card in your deck, if you have a card that's just doing something over and over and over again and giving you value, that's going to let you get an edge.
Okay, I think that's everything I want to talk about. Anything else you want to touch on fatigue?
No, I think that pretty much covered it. And I don't know if we ever came to a full conclusion. I think it's hard since both of us are divided, but hopefully, hearing some of our thoughts on either side of fatigue and just some of our discussion about it helps you think about fatigue and kind of conceptualize it in the game as well. Because I do think that, there's some very real trade-offs there, and that all blocking, all attacking both have potential issues, and probably the healthiest place for the game to be is when both of those strategies are viable some of the time.
If you don't like fatigue, just try it once. Maybe you'll find a game where you're like, wow, this feels good, and then you can transform. No, transform. No, what is the word? Convert.
Convert.
I think I like the word convert the best. Yeah, convert into a fatigue player, and then if we get enough people to play fatigue in every tournament, we'll get the strategy banned.
Ooh. So if you can't beat them, join them, and then LSS will do something about it.
Exactly.
Okay, so I think that's going to wrap up our episode. Thanks for listening. As always, if you have any thoughts about fatigue, we'd love for you to weigh in the comments down below. So feel free to let us know what you think about fatigue. Are there points you agree with or disagree with? We'd love to hear. Additionally, if there's anything you'd like to hear talked about on the podcast in our upcoming episodes, please also let us know about that. We're sort of in a bit of a down season right now with not so many events running. And if there's a particular topic you want to hear about, that'd be great to know. You can let us know once again in the comments, or you can reach out to us on social media. You can find me on Twitter at YukiLeeBender, and you can find Jay on Twitter at UedaJ. You can also email us at onthebauble@gmail.com and send us your questions and feedback directly there. Until next time, thanks for listening. Have fun playing Flesh and Blood.
For the sign off, do you want to talk about what are you gonna go? So okay, I'll try again. So you won your invite for the regional championships for Magic the Gathering, because you
Mm-hmm.
top aided the RCQ. Are you
And you
going?
also did.
I also did. Yes. Are you going to go to Edmonton and or is it Toronto? I can just double check
I
this.
think it's Edmonton and Toronto. I'm
Yeah.
not sure.
Are you going to either or both? What's your
Do we
plan?
know when it is?
I can take a look. Just give me 1 second.
I don't actually know when it is. I will say that I had no plans to go. Um, I wasn't especially playing the event to get the invite. I didn't really care about the invite. I was more just playing it because I felt like playing limited, and it was a tournament, and there was no Flesh and Blood tournament. Format seems okay. Um, so yeah, I was just like mostly doing it as like a thing for fun. I guess there's a non-zero chance that I could go if it would probably be contingent on like how many like it lining up at a good time and there being enough friends going that I would want to spend time with, and then I would consider going. But I think it'd be like mostly going for like the social thing and then like showing up to the tournament and having fun. But I don't know if I would like. Otherwise, I don't think I really would.
Wow, you don't want to hang out with Richard and Nam?
I mean, I do, but it's also like I can hang out with Richard and Nam in Vancouver.
No, you can't. That'd be impossible. You don't do that at all.
Yeah, okay. But yeah, I mean, like if there's like a bunch of friends, I feel like often like the big group experience of like playing an event, chatting with your friends, going for food after, like that's pretty fun. And I haven't done that in a while. And maybe. What
Yeah.
about you? Are you thinking of going?
Uh, it depends on what other card games are going on. So I'm just gonna tell you the date right now. It's Toronto is June 2nd to 4th, and Edmonton is June 16th to the 18th.
Mm.
This sounds like report card season.
Yeah, I was gonna say that's report card season. June 2nd to 4th is possible. June 16th to 18th is like pretty unlikely. It's in the last 1 to 2 weeks. So I kind of doubt that I would go to that one. But early June's still like kind of chill, sort of.
Okay, early June is Toronto, so you have to go to Toronto to play the RC.
Okay. I could maybe do that. I guess there's like, I feel like a lot of the Canadian flesh and blood people that people know about and like in the Toronto scene, like, I don't know, Matthew Dilks, Tarek Patel, Isaac Crute, Sean Dollywall. Although a lot of those guys come from Magic, David Rude, and a lot of them, I think, still like kind of play Magic sometimes. So I bet
Okay.
a bunch of them will be going to the RC if it's like in Toronto.
Yeah, that'll make sense. So yeah, maybe you
I
can
guess
hang out
that
with
was a
them.
good one. Yeah, maybe that'd be kind of fun. Hmm. Okay, I'll think about it.
Yeah, I don't know. I
What's
tip
the format? It's constructed, right?
it's Pioneer.
Ooh, okay. Pioneer sounds okay.
Yeah,
I can
so
just play the Lotus Field deck. I like the Lotus Field deck. I know it's not the degenerate one with Underworld Breach anymore, but I still like that deck.
yeah, I think Nam was playing Lotus Field recently and was saying that that deck was broken.
Yeah,
So
I've heard it's like a good deck in the format. So I mean, I guess who knows what will happen by June. I'm sure there'll be like 5 magic sets and things could have changed, but um, yeah, maybe I'll do that. I don't know. You've planted the seed now. Good work, Jay.
yeah, very good. Yeah, I don't know. Honestly, I feel like I'm gonna be like, oh, let's go, and then I'm gonna strand you, and I'm gonna go somewhere else.
It sounds so likely, honestly. Are you gonna play Battle Spirit Saga, Jay?
Oh yeah, I'm gonna tell my boss that which days I need to take off. Probably tomorrow, and then I'm gonna go to Vegas to go play Battle Spirits. I'm gonna take some extra days to stay in Vegas to play some poker and try and make money. So it'll be a good weekend.
Nice. That's the same weekend as the Outsiders release.
Yeah, March 24, 25, 26.
Yeah, I'll see. I might be traveling down to the gosh, what is it called? I can't think of its full name, but I know that MinMax Games in Chicago is partnered with the Realm Gaming Network, and they're running some kind of 5K event. The new set will be legal. I think it gets you an invite if you place well enough, or maybe if you win. I don't know. It can somehow potentially get you an invite to an invitational later on that I think is like a 20K or something. So I might
Oh,
go to that.
if you are gonna go to that, I might pass you some cards to buy list to min max because I know their buy list was actually pretty good, and I was thinking about selling to them, but then shipping is too much.
Okay, fair enough. Yeah, we'll see. Maybe
Yeah,
it would be good practice for the PT as well. So
they had like an extensive like buy list that was like pretty decent, and like they had different pricing for like foils and non foils, and it was just like, yeah, it was good. It was a good buy list.
yeah, yeah, I think that'd be a lot of fun. It mostly depends if it mostly depends if I can pressure Nia into going because flying to flying to Chicago sucks from Vancouver. It's really expensive. So if I went, I would fly to Toronto for like $160 and then get Nia to try.
Was it
It's like an 8 hour drive. It's
when
uh,
I heard last time? I thought Neil wanted to like fly to Vancouver to try and practice draft on that weekend.
he did. I'm trying to convince him to go to this instead. He'll do one of the two. I don't know. I'll be hanging out with Nia that weekend. I just don't know what it's gonna look like just yet. We'll see.
Yeah, just convince him to go there and then after fly to Vancouver when I'm back in Vancouver so we can start doing some draft practice for the PT.
Very good. That's a good idea. And plus, like, we should go down there. There's not going to be any good players from the Midwest. Like, I heard one person was going. I don't know if you've heard of him before. Michael Hamilton. I don't know who that is. Like, event should be pretty soft, right?
Yeah, super soft. Yeah, Midwest tournament.
There's going to be some good players, but it does sound like fun. So
Yeah, you
we'll
can you
see.
can actually test your skills. Like that never happens, Yuki. The only tournament you show up to is like Canadian nationals.
Yeah, I just play nationals and pro tours pretty much and worlds. It's true.
It really is the only events we can get to.
It's hard. It's hard to go to a calling. Like it people always talk about like, oh, there's no callings in Europe and like, yeah, I have callings closer than Europe, but if you want to go to like Indianapolis or somewhere like that, it's a full day of travel on both ends, honestly, because you can't get even though the Sunday flight back's pretty good because the time zones work in your favor, you can't actually get a flight that leaves late enough. Like the latest flight leaves at 5, And if you top it, you just can't make your flight. So you have to book for Monday. And then Friday, because of the time change, you like leave at 6 and arrive at like 7 p.m. or something. It's like an entire day of travel. So you just end up like having to have 2 days, like a day on either side for travel. So it's a pretty big commitment to go.
Yeah, it's you can do the monster play with which is you book a flight on Sunday night, and then if you top eight, you book another flight on Monday instead and pay 5 times the price.
That sounds so mid.
You could do
So
another.
what's the angle here? I like play the event, I top eight, I sell the gold foil, and then I like break even because I paid for both my flights. It's like, oh man.
Yeah, you win by the margin of the PTI.
Oh, okay, okay. Value, I guess.
Uh, yeah, somewhat. You could be like a monster, like someone from Vancouver who decided to play Worlds, then didn't want to play day two for whatever reason, and just booked the flight and flew back anyways.
Wait, what?
You didn't hear?
No.
Yeah, he made day two. He was XN3 or 4, and he didn't want to play Worlds anymore, so he just booked a flight for Sunday morning and just left instead.
And he like already had a flight booked for Monday?
Yep. He like changed his flight and got like some rebate, I think.
Wow.
Monster play.
Okay, I could do that. Um, wow.
Okay. I think this is enough for a what's it called? A sign off.
It's honestly probably too much, but
Some people will enjoy it, some people won't. If you don't enjoy it, just don't listen to it. They're already not here anymore.
true. If you did make it this far, let us know. I would be curious to know if anybody's still listening.
Okay, perfect. And good night everyone.
Good night.